It was a bright, bustling morning at Austin Bergstrom International Airport. Sunlight spilled through the massive glass windows, illuminating the crowd of travelers streaming through security, dragging suitcases, sipping coffee, and checking boarding passes. Among them was 11-year-old Shah, his eyes wide with wonder and a grin stretched across his face. This wasn't just any day. It was the day. His first plane trip. He clutched his weathered blue backpack like it was a treasure chest. His mother and older sister flanked him, and together they stood in line, bound for Los Angeles. A week of beaches, palm trees, and laughter with their aunt waited on the other side of the clouds. But for Shah, the journey mattered just as much as the destination. "How high do planes go?" he asked for the third time. "Do you think we'll fly through a cloud?" His mother chuckled, brushing a speck of lint from his neatly pressed polo. "You'll see soon enough, baby. It's all part of the adventure." At the security checkpoint, Shah's excitement was contagious. A nearby couple smiled as he marveled at the conveyor belt, watching their bags disappear into the scanner like some kind of magic trick. Strangers whispered kind words, some even laughing at his pure joy. Once they reached their gate, Shah pressed his face against the giant terminal window. "It's so big," he whispered, staring at the airplane parked just outside. His sister nudged him playfully. "Don't worry. After your 100th flight, this will all be boring." Shah shook his head. "I don't want it to be boring. I want to remember everything." Then came the boarding call. "Group B, that's us," said his mom. Shah practically bounced down the jet bridge. The cabin, with its neat rows of seats and glowing lights, felt like another universe. He spotted the window seat and dove in, nose to the glass, trying to soak in every second. But as the plane filled and seatbelts clicked into place, a chill crept in. From the front of the plane, a tall blonde flight attendant appeared, hair pulled tight, expression tighter. Her name tag read Miss Bradley. Her eyes scanned the cabin with a rigid intensity until they landed on Shah. And stayed there. Shah didn't notice. He was too busy whispering, "Mom, look. I think they're closing the door." But Miss Bradley stepped forward. "Excuse me," she said curtly. "I need you to lower your voice and sit still. You're distracting other passengers." Shah blinked. Confused. His mother looked up, frowning. "He wasn't being loud," she said, calm but protective. "He's just excited. It's his first flight." Miss Bradley's expression didn't soften. "Regardless. He needs to be quiet. We have other passengers to think about." Heads turned. Passengers glanced over their shoulders. A few raised eyebrows. A man behind them muttered, "That's odd. He wasn't doing anything." Shah's cheeks flushed. "Did I do something wrong, Mom?" he whispered. She squeezed his hand. "Not at all, baby. You're just fine." Miss Bradley walked off without another word. But the warmth in their row was gone. In its place, unease. Minutes passed. Then she returned. But this time, her tone wasn't corrective. It was final. "Ma'am," she said, her voice cold. "I'm going to have to ask you and your son to leave the plane." The words hung in the air like a slap. Shah's mom blinked. "On what grounds?" Miss Bradley folded her arms. "Your son is being disruptive and making other passengers uncomfortable. This is a safety concern." Gasps rippled through the cabin. A woman across the aisle stared in disbelief. The man behind them leaned forward, "This is ridiculous." "No one's uncomfortable," Shah's mom said, louder now. "He's a child. He hasn't done a thing wrong." Miss Bradley signaled to another attendant. "Please escort them off the plane." Shah's sister sat frozen, too shocked to speak. His mom stood slowly, hands trembling. "Come on," she said softly. "Shah, let's go." Shah's eyes welled with tears. He didn't understand. He had followed every rule. Why was this happening? As they gathered their things, phones emerged. Passengers began recording. Quiet murmurs turned into full-blown protest. This isn't right. She's singling them out. But Miss Bradley didn't flinch. The walk off the plane was the longest walk Shah had ever taken. The door closed behind them. And so did his joy. But the story didn't end there. The car ride home was silent. Shah stared out the window, his mom's voice echoing in the front seat. You did nothing wrong. His sister finally spoke. We need to say something. People need to know. That night, in their living room, Shah's mom posted a detailed account on social media. Calm. Clear. Respectful, but resolute. She ended with one question. Why was my son treated like this? Attached were photos, Shah beaming at the terminal, and Shah after, tear-streaked and devastated. The post exploded. Within hours, thousands had shared it. Comments poured in. This is unacceptable. Name the airline. They need to be held accountable. This happens too often to families who can't fight back. Then came the moment that changed everything. A woman named Teresa, a fellow passenger, messaged Shah's mom. I recorded everything, she wrote. Attached was a video. In it, Shah sitting quietly. His mother calmly defending him. Miss Bradley's cold, unyielding tone. Murmurs of protest from nearby passengers. The truth was undeniable. Shah's mom posted the video. It went viral. News outlets picked it up. Hashtags surged, #Justice for Shah. Demands poured in across platforms. By noon, the airline issued a generic apology and promised an investigation. But people weren't satisfied. The next morning, it was national news. Talk shows debated the incident. Commentators questioned, how often does this happen to families who aren't recorded? Under growing pressure, the airline placed Miss Bradley on leave. But the story kept growing. Shah's family was invited onto a morning show. Sitting beside his mom, Shah quietly told the world, I was excited to go on my first plane ride. I didn't know why she was mad at me. I didn't do anything wrong. The clip broke hearts, and sparked conversations. Soon after, the airline fired Miss Bradley. They issued a direct apology and pledged reforms, including bias training and a new passenger hotline. But for Shah's mom, it was never about revenge. It was about respect. A week later, in Austin, a rally formed. Hundreds showed up. Signs waved in the air. Every child deserves respect. Shah took the stage. When I got kicked off that plane, he said, voice trembling, I thought I did something wrong. But I didn't. And no one should feel that way. Applause roared. His mom wiped away tears. Shah, once an excited little boy heading to his first flight, had become a voice for change. A symbol of resilience. And as the airline launched new initiatives, as people shared their own stories, as conversations reached schools, neighborhoods, and boardrooms, Shah's story lived on. Not as a tale of cruelty, but as a reminder of what it means to stand tall, even when the world tries to make you small. Angelus, this time greeted with warm smiles and open arms. As they stepped onto the plane, the captain himself emerged from the cockpit to welcome Shah personally. Heard we've got a VIP flying with us today, he said with a grin, offering Shah a fist bump. The cabin crew, clearly briefed and deeply moved by the story, made sure every moment of the flight felt special. They handed him a set of plastic wings, a tradition for young first-time flyers, and even allowed him to peek inside the cockpit before takeoff. Shah's eyes sparkled again, the way they had that very first morning in Austin. Only now, there was something different in his expression. He was no longer just a boy curious about clouds and jet engines. He was someone who had been tested, someone who had seen how unfair the world could be, and yet had stood tall through it all. As the plane lifted off the ground, he looked out the window, not with innocent wonder this time, but with a quiet, earned confidence. Beside him, his mom squeezed his hand, her own eyes glistening not with fear or sadness, but pride. When they finally landed in Los Angeles, the terminal was buzzing, not with ordinary travelers, but with a small group of supporters holding up signs that read "Welcome Shah." And every child deserves to fly. Reporters were there, too, but Shah didn't feel overwhelmed. He smiled, waved politely, and held his head high. Their trip unfolded like a dream. His aunt welcomed them with open arms, and they explored the sunny beaches just as Shah had imagined. He stood at the edge of the Pacific Ocean, his shoes in hand, the cool waves lapping at his feet, and he laughed. A full, free laugh that reminded his mother of who he truly was, a boy who still believed in joy, even after being told by the world that he should sit down and be quiet. Back home, the impact of Shah's story continued to ripple outward. The local school district implemented bias awareness workshops for educators. Community centers hosted discussions about equity in public spaces. Airlines around the country, responding to mounting pressure, began re-examining their own customer service and training practices. One afternoon, a package arrived for Shah. Inside was a small glass plaque engraved with the words, "To Shah, for your courage, your voice, and the change you inspired. National Youth Advocacy Council." Shah held it in his hands, his fingers tracing the etched letters. "Mom," he said, his voice hushed, "I didn't know just being myself could change things." His mom knelt beside him, wrapping her arms around his shoulders. "That's the thing, baby," she whispered. "You didn't just change a policy. You changed people's hearts. That's the kind of power you carry." And so, Shah's first plane ride, the one that had started with wide-eyed wonder and ended in public humiliation, became something else entirely. It became a turning point. A story not just of a boy who was wronged, but of a family who chose to speak up. A story of community rising together. A story of one child's resilience in the face of quiet, persistent injustice. And somewhere above the clouds, where Shah once dreamed of floating, something else now soared: hope. Back in Austin, as the video of Shah's mistreatment continued to circulate, the community's outrage transformed into organized action. It wasn't just online noise anymore, it was momentum. Local activists held a candlelight vigil outside the airport terminal where the incident took place. Hundreds gathered, some holding signs that read, "Let our children dream," and "Justice for Shah." There were mothers, fathers, students, teachers, even retired flight attendants who had come forward to say, "We were trained better than this. What happened to Shah is inexcusable." Shah's school organized a "Dream Big" day in his honor. Every student wore wings, paper ones they'd cut and colored themselves. His classmates, once too young to understand racial profiling, now spoke about fairness and empathy in their own words. A teacher who had once told Shah to stop daydreaming about airplanes, now stood in front of the school assembly and publicly apologized. "We should be fueling our children's dreams, not clipping their wings," she said through tears. The local black community rallied, not just in protest, but in purpose. A group of black pilots, who had once walked the same uncertain path as Shah, flew in from around the country to meet him. They took him to a private airfield and showed him the inside of a real jet. They let him sit in the captain's seat and told him, "This is where you belong. Not just in the back of the plane, but in control of it." National organizations took notice. Youth mentorship programs offered Shah scholarships, aviation summer camp invitations, and leadership opportunities. A prominent children's author even reached out with plans to write a book inspired by his story, Shah's First Flight, A Journey of Courage. And then came the city council. During a packed town hall meeting, citizens demanded better training for city employees and airport staff. One young girl, no older than Shah, stepped up to the microphone and said, "If you don't see my brother as innocent, if you don't see Shah as a dreamer, then maybe you don't see me either." Her words, simple and piercing, silenced the entire room. That moment became the headline quote in major newspapers the next day. Policy followed. The airport revised its customer service protocols and partnered with community leaders to offer implicit bias training to all staff. A new position was created within the city government, Child Advocacy Liaison, to ensure that young voices, especially from marginalized communities, were heard in future policy discussions. The airline itself, under mounting pressure and reputational damage, offered not just a formal apology, but a multi-million-dollar commitment to equity in travel initiatives. Their new campaign, "Every Seat Deserves Respect," featured real stories of young travelers from diverse backgrounds. The first face on the billboard? Shah. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the thousands of kids who had been told in small, quiet ways that they didn't belong. It was about every child whose potential had been dimmed by someone else's bias. Shah's story, once a private pain, had become a public reckoning. And yet, even with all the noise, the press, and the policy change, it was the community's love that meant the most. The neighbors who dropped off homemade cards. The strangers who walked up to his mother at the grocery store just to say, "Thank you for speaking out." The teenager who told Shah, "Because of you, I signed up for flight school." Because in the end, the real flight wasn't just from Austin to Los Angeles. It was a flight toward something bigger, dignity, justice, and the soaring truth that no child should ever have to earn the right to simply be a kid. The end.